Mary LaHammer here from Twin Cities PBS with the story behind the story of the first week of session, and then I'll preview the second week of session. First week was really about the return of lawmakers, and I'll start in the Senate because it was the triumphant return of Senator John Hoffman and that walk up the Senate stairs. You'll see that in just a moment and how meaningful that was in him having the state troopers there who were by his side in his recovery. You'll see that in just a moment. Then I'm going to take you to the House chambers and honoring House Speaker Melissa Hortman and the history she made there, the longest serving female Speaker of the House in state history, and her family was there. Behind the scenes, what you won't see on camera is all the former lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, there greeting each other, and how emotional it was for them, and what a dear, close friend she was to so many. And she was really kind of a den mom and took care of folks and, always made sure everybody was rested and fed, and the little things on the house floor, the flowers she loved to garden, and the seeds, so that people would go and plant seeds in their own garden, and the spirit and the tone. It was so bipartisan. There was a proclamation read, and Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the aisle took turns reading that proclamation, and that was very meaningful and moving. And I even noticed beforehand how members crossed the sides of the aisle. What we noticed during the pandemic when lawmakers could not be there in person is how they didn't get to know each other and their families and really didn't get to establish those relationships. We are now starting to see some of those relationships growing again. And I watched Democrats and Republicans physically cross the aisle on that first day and hug each other and greet each other and really working hard to reestablish those relationships again. I told the Speaker of the House that, and she just beamed when I told her how I saw some of those old-fashioned bipartisan friendships seem to be reigniting, and that meant a lot to her. And she talked about how Melissa Hortman was a mentor and the only speaker she ever knew in her time there, and how meaningful that was. And I watched her out of the corner of my eye as I was up in the media gallery, and I watched her repeatedly wiping tears, and her trying to keep her composure on the floor before she went up to the dais and gave her speech. And then I took a step back, and it was emotional for me too. I knew Melissa Hortman since the day she got into politics 27 years ago. My father screened her when she was a candidate. My dad, you probably have all heard this, with the Associated Press, in total about half a century, 36 years full-time at the state capitol for the AP, but then he went to the Star Tribune editorial board and he screened candidates when they used to endorse legislative candidates. And when he endorsed Melissa Hortman for the state house, he wrote that she would hit the ground running and she'd be ready to contribute right away. And I remember that, and I remember him saying how smart she was and what a tough, feisty attorney she was, and that I knew her from the beginning, and I remembered that he thought she was so smart. And then I was watching people on both sides of the aisle so emotional and saying goodbye to her. And I kind of took a step back and I looked at the press corps, and there are so many new members of the press corps. And I remember thinking, I think I'm the only one who knew her from the beginning at that moment. And I was kind of wiping a tear back and took a step back. And then at that moment, I saw Glenn Stubbe, longtime Star Tribune reporter, and he was a photographer. He was emotional too, and he put his camera down for a second and he reached out and gave me a big bear hug, and we looked at each other and he said to me, we knew her, we really knew her. And that was a tough moment. There aren't a lot of us left who have served decade after decade after decade and really knew Melissa Hortman like that. And then after the whole ceremony, I walked out and there was a 4-string quartet playing in the rotunda, and it was really quiet, meaningful moment. And a long-time lawmaker walked out and met my eye, and we were both feeling real emotional. And he walked up to me and said, I don't know how much longer I can do this. It's a sentiment I'm hearing from a lot of lawmakers at the Capitol, and you're seeing that from the dozens of retirees. And if you watched Almanac at the Capitol on Wednesday, you saw more than 40 years of the career of Senator Ann Rust, who served in the State House and the Senate, her reflecting. And we'll be featuring key important retiring lawmakers all session long. The other change you'll see is security, and we have some news of what security found. More than 10,000 people came through the Minnesota State Capitol on the first week, and more than 50 guns, permitted guns, were disclosed to Capitol Security, and about a half a dozen banned items. We don't know exactly what those were. There were rallies, everything, so it could be something as simple as, like a stick in a sign that couldn't come through. But those are some of the stats. The other thing we also noticed is, now we're talking about guns, and we're talking about permits. I saw for the first time this week lawmakers open carrying in committee in a holster. I've known lawmakers who have carried for years, and it would be, law enforcement, military, but it's always more subtle, under coats, under jackets, but definitely saw open carrying this week. And the rules have changed now. So yes, you can legally carry a permitted weapon into the Capitol, but in the Senate gallery, no weapons are allowed. So there is another screening. I think on day one, doing my job running between the Capitol, the House, and the Senate because of the different rules, I passed through a metal detector 5 different times doing my job. So it definitely is a different pace there. I know I saw Rob Dorr from the Gun Owners Caucus say it took him 23 minutes to get in one day. So it is a different experience for those of you coming to the state Capitol with some of the new weapon screenings. The other thing we saw, that very bipartisan tone on day one started to shift, and I'll talk about that after the story. Take a look.
The House will come to order.
A somber start to session as lawmakers remembered the assassinated former House Speaker, Melissa Hortman.
Colin, Sophie, and entire family. Hard to come up with the words, but as I think 8 months of this tragedy and watching you have to endure not just the loss, but the very public grieving, the grace and dignity and decency that you've conducted yourself is a lesson for all of us.
On June 14th, her bright light was extinguished, along with Mark and Gilbert. That day was the start of what has been the longest summer and the hardest winter. Children killed in a church, Minnesotans killed in the street.
The Senate welcomed back Senator John Hoffman, who survived the same assassin.
For the Minnesota State Troopers who protected my family and me in the emergency room, they were there in the ICU as I learned to walk again and established a goal to walk up those Capitol steps with them. They kept watch during our most vulnerable hours. I am grateful to them forever. I return changed, but not deterred. More convinced than ever that the leadership is measured not by how we respond when everything is going right, but how we respond in our hardest hours. Members, let's rise above the noise and let us govern with humility. And let us prove through our actions, not just words, that democracy is stronger than fear.
Security has changed at the Capitol, with weapons screenings and additional checkpoints. In the first week, with more than 10,000 visitors, 51 people checked had legal permits to carry firearms, and 7 prohibited items were detected or redirected.
Visitors to the Capitol will now have to enter a new security checkpoint when they first enter the building, and legal permit carriers can bring a gun into the Capitol, but not into the Senate public viewing galleries because they have banned guns. The House and Senate control their own spaces.
We've got to do some things around guns, make the safer. We're obviously going to have a conversation about what's befallen Minnesota under this federal occupation. I'm going to put forward once again a complete package on fraud reduction.
The Republican priority for session remains stopping fraud.
You had leaders, city and state leaders, calling on businesses to shut down for a day and to strike. That is a choice. Not all businesses chose to do that.
Make Minnesota competitive going forward, but the idea that we're going to do some sort of bailout instead of trying to figure out how to fix our business environment, I don't think that's something that there's going to be bipartisan support for.
Democrats are not going to let the immigration issue or its impact fade.
The result of Operation Metro Surge, which is not over yet, I want to be very clear. We are still seeing activity in our communities. We are still having our neighbors kidnapped. We are still having observers being aggressively targeted and people being detained. This has brought generational devastation. This is something that Trump and Republicans have brought because Republicans in Minnesota will not stand up to him.
Bills would mean no more masks for all law enforcement and no more unmarked vehicles.
Let's stand together as a DFL and a Minnesota GOP and say no more. This is the kind of moment in history where we must say never again will we allow this to happen anywhere in Minnesota or any state in the United States.
Voters are watching, and voters will hold people accountable if they don't stand up to this administration.
ICE is destroying the trust that police departments across Minnesota have worked hard to rebuild in recent years.
Our desire is for ICE to leave and never to return. But if they do return, we want to make sure that we have tools in order to make sure that we can go into court.
But Republicans are furious about an early setback for a bipartisan fraud bill.
You didn't bring this bill to our attention. We only learned about the content of the DE when it posted.
The DE was not adopted. Therefore, there is no discussion on the DE.
House Republicans would put income and asset tests on benefits.
You may love your G-Wagon, but if you need taxpayers to pay for your food, it's time to sell your G-Wagon.
We are seeing records amount of fraud across our state, and it has just been an epidemic.
While the issue ended the governor's campaign, he's not giving up.
If you're a Republican and you're sitting there and you're saying fraud is a biggest issue, you've got no better partner in me. You tell me if there's something that'll fix it, I'll fix it. But you don't get to make stuff up.
You can see in that story really the tone shifting from that somber bipartisan remembrance of House Speaker Melissa Hortman and the triumphant return of Senator John Hoffman, who also survived that same assassin. Really the bipartisan coming together on the first day, and then within a day or two, the tone shifting and politics regaining a hold on the Capitol. And I would say the moment that marked that was in a House committee, and this was a state government committee, and they were hearing the bill that didn't get through the House last year, and that was to create the Office of Inspector General. This is to deal with the fraud that gained national headlines and a really big issue. And that bill had passed the Senate last year, had bipartisan co-authors in the Senate, and then failed in the House. That was brought in front of a committee in the House, and the House is tied. This is really important to know this. The House is tied. The committees are tied as well. And that came up for a vote in the House, and it failed on a tie vote, 7-7. And members got really upset. Democratic committee Chair Cleavorn had the gavel on that day, and Republicans in the committee were very upset. Cleavorn had the gavel, died on a tie vote there. What we'll be looking for is this coming week on Tuesday, the Republican co-chair has the gavel. That's Republican Jim Nash. He has scheduled that bill to come back now on Tuesday, and we expect some fireworks, and this bill will be back. And maybe another outcome, maybe not. It's still a tie vote, but this definitely will probably be must-see TV on Tuesday when this Office of Inspector General bill comes back. What we do know, and you can see there in the story, is when Senate Republicans held their press conference rolling out a series of different bills to address the fraud issue, they accused the governor of taking down the Inspector General bill last year, and then they said again they suspected the governor was behind this bill. They're saying the governor tried to create his own Inspector General through executive order, and suspecting again he was behind that. But we're seeing a different tone. We saw a House Democrat say that the state owes people an apology for all the fraud that's gone on. Whereas last year, Democrats were saying the governor's on it, it's getting better, and now we're starting to see this is what they call a lame duck session for the governor since he's no longer running for re-election. Democrats now taking a different tone with the governor and maybe not siding with him as much on this issue of fraud, and it's not going away. Definitely House Republicans, Senate Republicans, that is their main issue, but Democrats' main issue is still this issue of ICE action and immigration. They are not going to let that go away. Major legislation, major issue. We are seeing a late floor session in the Minnesota House. Democrats trying to get a bill on the floor to deal with that. Again, House is tied, so nothing gets done in the House without bipartisan action, bipartisan votes. They could not get the votes to deal on an emergency basis with immigration bills in the House. Now, the Senate, different story. While it's still very close in the Minnesota Senate, Democrats do have a 1-vote advantage, and they have leadership. And the Senate spent much of Friday, most of the day Friday, in committee hearing from national experts on constitutional law and immigration. And the experts there talking about immigration action and ICE violating constitutional law, and then going through a series of bills, a major package of bills. And those bills, it's important who is sponsoring and who is leading those bills. You have Senate Majority Leader Aaron Murphy having bills. You have Senate President Bobby Joe Champion, who's an attorney, having legislation. His bill would create the ability in the state for the state to hold federal officers accountable. Right now, and you've heard all the way to the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, talk about that there's immunity for federal officers and that they could not be held accountable. Well, Senate President Bobby Joe Champion, the attorney, is saying, we're going to deal with that. We're going to create legislation in Minnesota that is going to hold federal officers accountable. And they brought various citizens in who told really specific stories of their constitutional rights being violated, and they want to create civil. Again, the criminal is very, very difficult, and this is not going to be addressed there, but civilly creating a civil constitutional rights violation where federal officers could be held accountable for the violation of civil rights here in Minnesota. So immigration issue not going away at all. And also, again, letting people know when you come to the Minnesota State Capitol, it's the People's House, still is open to the public. But we do want to let you know, if you show up, you do have to come through a new security checkpoint. No longer can you climb the Capitol stairs all the way to the top of the stairs and enter the rotunda like you used to. You do have to come in on the ground floor now. And then if you want to come into the galleries, the House or Senate galleries, there's another security checkpoint. So do come to the Capitol, come and see the beautiful art and architecture and visit your lawmakers, see the whole political process in action, but do allow extra time for those new security checkpoints and continue to watch us Almanac Friday nights and the return of Almanac at the Capitol Wednesday nights, 7 o'clock on the Minnesota Channel, 10 o'clock on Channel 2, and then all of the social media channels here on Substack. I'll also be continuing to post on places like Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, Instagram, all those social media sites. Thanks for watching.